Alright, well hello, I'm Chris, and this is my how to wire a GM3 wire internally regulated alternator up. Now I made another video on here, and I apologize to anybody that watched it trying to wire an alternator up because I mistitled it. It was actually how to wire up a charging system, and the way I had the alternator wired up in that video doesn't always work. So I didn't really know that people were having so many problems with number one position. But that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to show you how to wire it up the right way, and we're going to go over the problems and solutions. Now, the ignition switches and the ignition systems and the way the car is wired can all be parts of why it doesn't work right, but hopefully I'll cover everything in this video. The main thing about this alternator is that number one is an exciter wire. And this is the wire that causes all the problems. The number two, voltage sensing, just needs to be connected back to positive. So that's the simple one. Usually everybody gets number two right. So if we understand number two, just needs to be connected back to hot. Things you're going to have to understand is that this is the diode. Okay, to make sure you don't get diodes that can't handle this voltage. This is fine. These were $3 for 3 of them. This is a diode. It only allows electricity to flow in one direction. Okay, and on these cars that use this alternator, this is the 194 bulb, the dummy light, the battery light, the idiot light, whatever you want to call it. This is your charging light. On your late model cars, whenever you turn the key on and there's a little light with the battery on it, that's what the dummy light is. And when I talk about wiring that in, it's all I'm doing is these things have that system on there that are going to tell you when the battery's not being charged. Okay, so this is the dummy light. You can get this anywhere. Okay, so the first situation is that you have a key switch that does not have accessories. So all you have is 3 positions: starter, ignition, and battery. The number one position, you have no choice but to run it off of ignition. Okay? Now, depending on your ignition, a 194 bulb may be enough to prevent it from backfeeding and keeping your car running. If the 194 bulb does not work, then you have to run the diode. If you can't get your car to shut off, run a freaking diode with the flow towards the alternator. Okay, so in this situation, a lot of times what happens is they have the coil wire ran at the same position on the ignition switch, and as soon as they turn that key back, it's backfeeding instantly. And in that situation, if that 194 bulb doesn't have enough resistance to shut your engine off, and then you want to go ahead and put the diode in, because it's probably going to be wired where the coil wire is very close to the number one exciter wire, and that electricity takes the path of least resistance, and boom, it just keeps your car running. So you're better off just going to go ahead and put diodes. A lot of ignition boxes will run a diode because the ignition box will actually overpower that light too. So probably the best bet, go ahead and just use a diode. Okay, now this situation, you have an ignition switch with 4 positions. You have ignition, and now you have accessories, and then this is battery. And if you have ignition, if you have so this just goes back here. Okay, now if you have an ignition switch with accessories, it's the same thing. You want to go ahead and try to run the number one position to accessories. And it's the same thing. You can run the 194 bulb. The 194 bulb should work in this situation. So you could run the dummy light, or the same thing. If you can't get it to shut off, just get a diode. So you're better off if you're going to be wiring this kind of stuff up. Just go ahead and I have these extra for that reason. You know, if somebody comes over here, we can't figure it out. You just run a freaking diode in that wire, and you can position this diode anywhere. I mean, you can put it in the engine bay or at the key switch. It's better to put it on the engine bay. So the best bet is that if you don't really know about all this and don't really have time to be messing with it, to go ahead and buy you a freaking diode, and wherever you run this wire from, whether you run it from the accessories or ignition on, go ahead and put the diode in there to flow towards the alternator. So, and this will take care of pretty much any problem that you have. And like I said, a lot of aftermarket ignition boxes, that's what they have. This is a 10 gauge stranded wire that goes to your battery. It charges your battery. Number one position, and we're going to go ahead and just run it with a diode because, you know, I don't want to confuse anybody. So this one can be ran to accessories or ignition. On with key. It's a white wire. (18 gauge). This one 18 gauge voltage sensing back to 12 volts anywhere. It needs to just run at least an 18 gauge. This is the one that you can jump and run it right there, or just run it somewhere in the system. Run it back to the battery, it don't matter. Okay, so the first situation that we have is we have the dummy light. This is the dummy light. Number one position is hooked to ignition. Number one is ran to ignition. This is the first situation where we do not have accessories. So we're going to pretend that our switch does not have accessories. We have to run it to ignition. Okay, so let's see what happens. Dummy light comes on. Battery charges. We go to shut it off. Let's shut it off. Oh my God. It's backfeeding and the car won't turn off. Oh my God, what do I do? This is all you do. It's all you do. You close the choke. Put your hand over it. A little adjustment screw, get a screwdriver, screw it down. There's no reason to freak out if it don't shut off. Okay, so you only have ignition on your switch. Some ignitions will actually work like that. And that's why I kind of tell you about testing it with this first if you want to run this first, because some ignitions will actually shut off. Not an aftermarket ignition box, but we were testing it on a Model A and it actually would not backfeed. But you saw what was happening was the light, when you shut it off, it was actually backfeeding through the light. So the ignition box has too much juice. What do we do to fix that? Okay, so how do we fix that? Okay, we got the dummy light. It wants to backfeed through it. Really, in this situation, you probably just want to take the dummy light out, or we're going to run a diode. So let's check that out. So, damn, I actually tore the fucking instructions up. Pretty sure that that side that is on is the flow of the electricity. So we want the electricity to flow, but I don't. You would want to cut this out and run it and solder it in series. I'm just doing this for the demonstration. Okay. Now we're going to try that again. Okay, so this is just stuck in there like if it was wired, but it's the same thing. Everything's the same. Haven't changed anything. We're going to do this test now. So there's no dummy light now. Alright. Charging. Now let's shut it off. There you go. You just want the diode pointing towards the alternator. Okay, so that's all we did right there. Fix the problem. The diode is your best bet. Just instead of the dummy light, just run a diode. That's if you have an ignition switch with no accessories. If you have a switch with accessories on it, you can still run it on ignition with the diode. So now we have number one position ran on accessories. Of course it's going to work like that with the diode, so we're not going to test that. But we're going to test it with the, and now we're going to test it with the 194 bulb. And if you're going through one of your cars and you're trying to find out the way it's wired, all you have to do is to put it in accessories, and if the dummy light comes on, then it's wired off of accessories. But it's also going to come on with ignition. Okay, so battery, got the dummy light on. That confirms that it's wired to accessories. Turn it back on, let's start it up. Dummy light went off, means that it's charging. Okay, let's try that one more time. That means the dummy light's wired to accessories. If it comes on in accessories, ignition. Charging. Let's shut it off. Car shuts off. Okay, so we pretty much got an idea now about the problems you can have, the main problem, the car still running, and how to wire the switch up. Now we're going to go over the other problem, which is the car won't charge. Okay, well the next problem is if your battery does not charge. Okay, this alternator does not even need the number one position hooked up. It will still charge. It just has to be revved up to about 2,500 RPMs and it'll start charging. We're going to demonstrate that now. But if you're not running number one or don't have it hooked up at all, sometimes this alternator doesn't want to charge. So it'll almost seem like something's stuck, but it'll sit there and idle, and you'll have to rev it up sometimes 3,000 RPMs to get it to charge. Now I don't think this one does that for some reason, but let's go ahead and test that. See, number one is not hooked up. See, it's not charging. See, if number one's not hooked up, it doesn't charge. We're gonna rev the engine up a little bit. Okay, so you see what happens whenever number one's not hooked up. It'll charge, you just have to rev it up. So I guess you could leave that off if you really wanted to. I've had cars where I never hooked this up before. Okay, the last problem is that your car starts up, charges the battery, but the car drains the battery. Like you go a week later and the battery is completely freaking dead. What happened in that situation was that these two wires got switched. Okay, so if your battery keeps going dead, you probably have these wires switched. Well, at least you have the voltage sensing wire in number 1 position, and it's going to have a draw, parasitic draw. Yeah, see, whenever it starts shaking back and forth like that, that's most likely going to be a parasitic draw, opposed to it just dropping solidly, because we just had the car running. So whenever it starts doing that back and forth stuff like that, well, I mean, this one in fact has a draw on it. So if you have these wires switched backwards, it's going to drain your battery down over time, and usually drains it completely freaking dead. Hopefully you kind of have a better understanding. In this video, you can ask me any questions and I'm going to try to help you. So like I said, recap. Put the car in accessories to find out if it's ran off of accessories. Dummy light goes off. Charging. Car shuts off. Thanks for watching.